We continue on our journey looking through this book, Leading with a Limp. In this chapter, it's chapter 2, it mentions who is a leader and why it's necessary to first count the cost. That's a good question. I mean, who is a leader? And quite frankly, when we go through the different understandings of leadership from various sources, we realize really in the end, and Allender points out, that everyone's a leader at some level. Whether you lead a community group, wherever you make a tough decision in places, you're a leader. We all are followers as well. Both those aspects are part of the life that we have of a faith. And so it's a good thing to remind ourselves again to say that we all lead. We make tough decisions, and that really God calls us to lead. But what does this really mean, and how do we count that cost? Well, there's some aspects to leading that he brings up that I think are helpful. And there are 6 things that I'm going to highlight, and then I'm going to finish with some insights from another staff person, actually, my wife Lisa, who had read this chapter and had some interesting comments that I'll just read for you, and that will close things out for us. So God calls everyone to lead, and quite frankly, the first thing that he talks about is that an aspect of leading is that there's going to be crisis somewhere, conflict, challenge, and not a bump in the road, not something where it's just a hiccup, love covers a multitude of challenges. But in this case, it's something that really hits. It's a crisis, coming from that Greek word krisis, which means judgment. Something happens. And, that's why Allender calls leadership a walk on the wild side. We are not in control, is what crisis reminds us of. And that these things come into our situation and we're not even sure why, and yet there they are. They're going to come. Then there's complexity, a second thing, which is competing demands, values, and perspectives, that it's not just a simple right and wrong, a binary, that this is easily fixed. Often it's framed that way. Often it's us versus them. It's made like it's really clear, but usually it's much more complex than that. People are hard to work through sometimes together in issues. People look at things differently. So there's a complexity. But in the end, what ends up happening is the third thing, which is betrayal. People go after us, or they shun us, or they promote indifference, or you were traveling along together, and now the friendship maybe is strained, or even to a point of not being there anymore. The person you thought you could trust the most. You see this in the Psalms throughout with it, and David is especially lamenting when he loses people who he thought were his friends. And this is a very difficult thing. And later in the book, I think Allender talks more about betrayal and how this can help us as reluctant leaders. Another thing is that loneliness is a given. Loneliness comes with the territory. It's very hard to develop those deeper friendships because we're with our people around us that we're leading, because there's times when we have trouble being transparent and we don't know how to express our heart, or we do express our heart. And next thing you know, someone takes advantage of that, or they stomp on us, or we hurt them with our power and our control. And so it's easier just to be on our own. And this is individualism that has affected our culture, also doesn't help us. After loneliness, he talks about weariness, and there's a weariness to the whole idea of being a leader. And this is something that just gnaws away at you day after day. And it can be weary when we're not holding each other up. And I think of the Lord of the Rings and Sam carrying Frodo. That's the weariness. Frodo was not going to make it to Mount Doom, and there's only hope he had was Sam carrying him. And people carrying us is very difficult, because they're not always there. And the last thing he says is glory. What do we do with the praise, the accolades? People telling us how good we are at things. People saying, "Wow, the buttering up, so to speak." And how do we handle power? The power people give us, the power that comes with a position, the power that comes with words that we say, whether from a pulpit or from a group we're leading, or when we're on committees, or when we're in our families, or we're at gatherings of other people in community center. There's the glory, and who wants the glory is easy to see in a room. And if we can't see it ourselves, it's a real challenge. And so we look through these aspects, and as the chapters move on, we're going to look more at them. I want to now read a closing piece just to encapsulate some things that personally got a hold of for my wife and what she thought. And I'm just going to read these from that, what she thought about counting the cost. She said, "Leading has always been difficult for me. True leading, that is. Actually leading, not just thinking that we're leaders. I struggle with the cost that comes along with leading, the loneliness, the dread of losing a friend, or worst, causing others pain or suffering as a result of a decision made as you lead. But the alternative has a higher cost. If you are called to lead in whatever capacity, to do it to the glory of God and for people to be able to see that. Like I said, the alternative is a higher one. Just look at Jonah, King David, Moses. When God wants you to lead, don't run away. Feeling you're ill-equipped, I think that's the whole point, is what Lisa says. Describing a leader, she continues, could take a long sip of tea. Could take a long process of explanation. But what she says, it's not just having a dumped pile of sugar into the tea and then just kind of drink it down, but it's stirring it in slowly. It takes time. And for the right time to sip it. Such is our influence, but as Lisa says before, many don't count the cost of leadership. We often go in thinking, if I can do all this for God, surely goodness and mercy are just going to follow me. But Jesus' ministry ended with him on a cross, she strongly says, and it's different. The difference is that for us it's not a cross, but we have things that come in our lives that we bear. Through it all, Jesus woos his followers and captivates and involves them into a bigger story. We've been grafted into that story, is the amazing truth. God pours out himself to us, and as Allender says, and we close this chapter with this thought, says that it allures us and points us to the next episode of how this story turns out. Spend some time thinking about that this week, trying to understand it as we go out into the places where we follow and where we lead, and we count the cost. Thanks.